Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today. Welcome, Kay.
Well, welcome to you too. Nice to meet you.
You too, Kay. Today I have the privilege of talking with Kay Sparling. She is an author and former opera singer. Do you still sing?
Well, hon, I'm really old. So I finally did retire from opera about 3 years ago.
Okay.
But I sang for decades.
Oh, wonderful. That's amazing to me. I cannot carry a tune to save my life, so I'm amazed by anyone who can. And so Kay wrote the book THAW, and it was based in part on some of your experience. Tell me about the book, and then I have questions.
Okay. Well, it's called Mission THAW, and it's set at the end of the Cold War. It's a feminist spy thriller, which in those times, hardly any women. You would find spies at Langley at CIA, but you would not see them out in the field very much. And it's about a character, Kaitlyn Stewart. She wins a Fulbright and she goes over to apprentice in a major European opera house. Soon after she arrives, she is pretty much kind of scouted by the CIA, and they want to recruit her for a special mission. And of course, she knows she wasn't expecting this, the last thing she was expecting. And she finds out they've been vetting her in graduate school for like 3 years. So that was quite a surprise. And when they approach her, like I said, they literally throw her in a car, and that's sort of like, yeah, hey.
No excitement from the beginning, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is absolutely a page turner. That's what all the reviewers and the readers say is, wow, you can't put this thing down because you don't know where it's going next. Yeah, and that's the beginning of her ride. And they tell her what they would like her to do for them. And at first she just, this is crazy. This is not what I came over here to do. Find someone else. And she starts to walk away. And then he says, the chief of the spy ring, he says, but what if you could help bring down the Berlin Wall? And so she turns around and says, well, what am I going to do? Hit a high C and knock it down? I mean, what can an opera singer do, from Iowa? I do not understand this. And so he says, well, if you agree, we'll explain it to you. Well, she's so intrigued, she has to listen to this. And very quickly she agrees. And at that point, she is still an apprentice because that's going to be her cover to get to the people she needs to get to. Because now we're talking the late 80s and we didn't have all the spyware we do now. And so therefore, a lot of it had to be, boots on the ground, going in, infiltrating cartels or whatever, and gathering information and reporting it. Because information is king in the spy world. Okay. And so they tell her, this is what we want you to do. We want you, because you can go to any part of high society where you're at. And she was in Vienna. We want you to become very friendly with the main mentor of the Vienna State Opera. He is also a very crooked businessman, and he is running for office and will probably win. And he is very, very powerful. And what he has done is he has made business with some East German businessmen and the KGB there in East Germany across the wall. And this is at the very time when USSR has freed, as they put it, all those satellite countries, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, etc. Okay. And when they did, they left them with no infrastructure. Absolutely, people were starving. They had no food, they had no electricity, they had no running water. Um, and so, what these people had to do is they had to, carry everything they could and rush into the nearest Western country. Well, for a lot of these people, it was Vienna. And the Austrians did not want these people. So there were all these huge tent refugee camps being set up on the edge of town. So, what the East Germans figured out is their economy was tanking, just like the USSR. So they thought, well, hey, all these people don't have jobs. We can lure them back in by saying we're going to give them jobs, we're going to give them housing, we're going to give them medical care. And, they might believe it, whereas in truth, these people would get on trains late at night and they would go into the middle of nowhere, somewhere between Austria and East Germany. And they'd stop at these small little villages where everybody'd be asleep. And they would have these, one train would come from the east and one would be coming from the west. And they'd literally have slave auctions. And they were horrendous. Okay. And all the children and the old people would be sent back to the camp they came from in the west. A lot of the women were bought into underground brothels in East Berlin. A lot of the girls were, some of the pretty boys were. And of course, the other men and women that could work, once they got there, well, they'd split up their families. And then once they got there, what they would do is, it was just like the concentration camps. There was no way out. And if you tried, you were executed. Okay. So this is the way they decided they could keep going. So the mission that Kaitlyn is on is to stop that trafficking. And it's not just the CIA, but also there's a whole group of MI6 that are in on it too. And since she was vetted in the United States, but they don't have time to send her back for training, they decide to train her right there. And her trainer ends up being the director of the MI6 group. And he is truly at the time the real James Bond. And I literally heard a phone call between him and Ian Fleming at that time. He used to call him all the time and say, okay, I'm writing my next novel. I'm thinking about this. What do you think it would work? Is this reality or not? I mean, that's who this guy was. He was the best spy in the free world. And that's who has to train her, because he has to train her quick. But, he thinks he's this trainer. She's going to put on her pretty ball gown. She's going to go be friends and act like a neo-Nazi to these people that are running this group. And then, just plant bugs all over their house and listen to, everything that they're saying at cocktail parties, etc. And then she'll come back and report. And that's what she does start with. But very soon, there's just so many plot twists that Kaitlyn just keeps getting more and more and more into this dangerous thing because of, a lot of the actions that the enemy does. And it's like the only one that can go in there is Kaitlyn, kind of thing. So she starts out as a pacifist and says, okay, if it would bring down the Berlin Wall, I'd do that for a couple of years and I'll come back and report what I'm learning, because we're trying to find out where these slave trades are going to be next. Because if we can find the proof, then we can prove it to UN, Geneva Convention, NATO, etc. Okay. And then we can stop it, right? That's the whole idea. All right. So Kaitlyn, she's like, well, I would do that because, information is king. By the end of the novel, Kaitlyn knows how and will shoot a machine gun. Okay. Because of who she meets and what they do to people, particularly women. So this book has some very graphic things. And, it's very, very hard to handle, but they're all true. These are true things that the KGB and the neo Nazis did to those women, those refugee women, particularly at the time. So, this is not only a feminist thriller in the fact that Kaitlyn Stewart's the only woman on her team and the only woman in that whole theater over there, but also because she is fighting. That's what keeps her going. When she witnesses what she witnesses with what happens to these women, that's what keeps her going. She's going to do it for the women and the children. And yeah. So it's written in first person because I was trying to give the reader the feeling that, you know, she's like the most unlikely accidental spy. So they're just with her from the day one, and they're just riding her back. And she's not perfect. She makes a lot of mistakes, and she pays for a lot of them. She gets a lot of put downs, obviously by some of the men on the crew. And so you're feeling it and you're thinking it with her. The things that she doesn't say out loud, and it's a roller coaster ride.
It sounds like it. It sounds like you did tons of research for this too.
Well, okay, so some of this is autobiographical. I witnessed a lot of this stuff myself at the time. I was living in Vienna at the time. That's what made me know about all this. And I got involved with the refugee plight as I guess a humanitarian. I was an opera singer, but it all started one day when a priest said, "Hey, I'm going out to the edge of Vienna. Why don't you come with me? And maybe you could set up some entertainment for these poor folks." And then it went to, "Well, okay, you're running in the richest circles, in the city. Maybe you could find some, more liberal people that would give money to this camp, because we need medicine, we need, toys for the kids, we need clothes, everything." And so I just kept getting reined in. And along with that, um, yeah, I definitely became an advocate for those people. And again, particularly for the women. Um, I would interview people, and I would in the tents, and I would help out sometimes the Red Cross nurses and that kind of thing. And then, well, I met a few spies. And so my research is my own eyewitnesses to a lot of this stuff. Hours of interviews with spies.
Wow. And did you know they were spies at the time?
Well, that's always a little tricky. No, not when I first met them, but I would figure it out, because, these people would be around the camps a lot. And some of them were just hunk-a-bunk men, right? And I'm a single diva. So they're kind of interested in talking to me, and I'm pretty interested in talking to them. So I literally was dating some of these people, particularly one. And yeah, through time, it was told to me that they were spies. And so it was pretty darn easy to get a hold of old boyfriends and old friends, to get the full story. So that's why this is based on true fact. Now you're going to ask me, well, why didn't you just do nonfiction? Why didn't you say this is a true story and this all happened? Well, because I'm protecting every one of the people involved, the good people. I don't care about the enemies, but I had to change their names too. I had a conversation, and intelligence decided it would be better for me to fictionalize. Yes, the statute of limitations has been lifted, but these people are still alive. And if the enemies aren't alive, their families are. And they're still continuing, what their ancestors did. So in that case, everybody gets protected.
Right. Yeah. It makes sense to me that you would do a fictionalized account that you don't
Yeah.
want, you
Yeah.
don't want to jeopardize anybody, you know.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And you even have to worry with terrorists like that, that even if, let's say, the spy that, really took them down is gone now, well, their family isn't. Maybe they have a son, a daughter, grandkids, So that's why you have to fictionalize. But this is almost verbatim truth.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing. It sounds like an amazing journey for you as well as like everyone you helped, I'm sure.
Well, after that experience, I kind of became an opera singer slash volunteer, for NATO, for, Red Cross. And so, this is a series, and the next one that Kaitlyn runs into is the Bosnian War. So the
Oh,
first time she's working with human trafficking, and the International Labor Organization estimates that 21 million people are trafficked worldwide as we speak. That's in every country, every, here, every state, every city. I live in a very small college town in the upper Midwest. And 2 weeks ago, the front news of our little paper was 7 men were arrested for trafficking women and prostitution and underage girls. It's everywhere. Also, right north of me is a large reservation of Ojibwe. And that is a terrible problem they are having with young women just disappearing.
yeah, I was just seeing about the girl in Oregon. I think she was a college graduate or something, but yeah, I mean, I think the New York Times just ran her story again. But she was a member of one of the indigenous tribes, so that's
Mm-hmm.
sad to hear.
Yeah, and the problem is that the res police, aren't very effective off the res, and the FBI then has to take over, and it's it's a real mess. So I can see after the 3 true books of Kaitlyn Stewart, where she was here, during the end of the Cold War, and when the Berlin Wall came down. Then she moves over to Prague and ends up in Bosnia, which that's ethnic cleansing. That's genocide she deals with there, and massacres, and and then she decides it's too much for her. She goes back and says, "I'm going," because she always had an apartment in New York. So she's like, "I'm going to live in New York. I'm just going to sing it stateside, and kind of forget all this stuff." And her friends are all a little younger than her, and they're having families. They're like, "Hey, Kate, you had a really good degree in music ed, didn't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, my parents made me do that." And they said, "Well, we'd like to start a school, in southern Manhattan and Long Island." And I got to thinking about it. I just went through a divorce, and I was like, that might be a good way to kind of, you know, not have to go all the time and live out of a suitcase, and just sing here and teach. And so we did it. And 1 year later, 9/11 happens. And so Kaitlyn is, oh, you know, she gets a call within minutes. She's back in the CIA. And so the third book is called Homefront. The second book is called Impromptu, because she's with the Red Cross. And her sidekick this time is actually a priest that's went AWOL that she knew in the first book. And he knows this, this massacring is happening. And so he says he'll help the CIA. And so she's sort of looking after him. And when she figures this out, what is exactly going on, then she reports back to her chief and says, "We got to go save this whole group of boys, they're coming for him." And we saw what they've already done. We've seen 10 massacres in 10 days. So, and he tells her, no, that's not your job. And so, all the Red Cross trucks and, the relief trucks are told to turn around. And Kaitlyn goes AWOL. She goes impromptu. And her and the priest, she grabs a couple machine guns from security and some helmets. And there's this big old truck, that they bring the rice and everything in. And they go, well, how would an officer know how to drive that truck? Well, she knows how to drive that truck because she's an Iowa farm girl. And she used to drive those kind of trucks to the elevator during harvest. And so she's like, well, it won't be real pretty, but I can get it to move. And so they take off on their own. Everybody else turns around and does what they're supposed to do. And she tries to save those boys, or they try to save those boys. And at the end, she gets punished for it really bad. But she's even arrested, and they go, well, what did you do? She's like, well, I acted impromptu. So that's the name of the second book. Third book is Mission Homefront, because she literally lives in New York when it's attacked. So
all right.
Yeah.
So Mission THAW is already out. Is Impromptu already out yet, or is it coming out?
No. I am still writing it because Mission THAW came out in August, and I do work full time, and so it's hard to be a writer. But it's about half finished, and so my goal is by August 15th to have the second book, ready to hand over. So yeah, and then I don't know exactly what the release date would be, but so it's not out yet. Just Mission THAW.
Yeah, well, I can see like the compelling need to share this story. Did you ever think you'd write a novel? I mean, was that always in the back of your head, or you just thought,
no,
how did that happen?
No, because I started singing when I was 7 years old. I was a Broadway and sacred singer, and I kept doing that till I was 27. And then I went and trained for opera, and then been doing that for decades. And then, of course, was a coach as well. The reason this book exists is because I was suffering from PTSD from several things I mentioned that I lived through and saw. And I was not done a darn thing about it. And then it came down on me. Took a while, but then I started having the nightmares and the panic attacks. And, I thought I was having a heart attack. Well, no, I wasn't, And so I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I was going to a therapist who's very, very famous for treating PTSD. And, we were doing music therapy, we're doing art therapy, aromatherapy, all these cool things. But he said, I think we need to do some writing therapy. Why don't you start writing your experiences, chronologically down in a journal? And then from time to time, he would read them. And he said, have you ever thought of writing a book about this? And I was like, no. When would I do that? I'm still an opera singer. I have a big studio, of students. And he said, well, think about it sometime, maybe when you retire or something. Well, so I don't know why, but it was alluring to me. And at that very moment, a personal tragedy happened to me where my mom was diagnosed with Lewy body Alzheimer's. And I brought her into my home because she was the dearest thing on earth to me. Okay. And so a lot of things got, put on the back burner because I was taking care of my mom. And she would retire early, and I would just decide the way I could escape best was to start writing this book. And so that's what I did. Now I'm going to admit, I had lived with a very famous writer. I won't say who it was, but this was so long ago that, I only knew about the writing world from that era. Now we're talking about when I was a graduate student. And so, I didn't really, unfortunately, look up a lot of stuff. Like, how do you write a novel? I just sat down, and a lot of folks get a giggle out of this, but I wrote a 90,000 word novel. over a spread of time. And then I thought, well, now I have to, close to Madison, there's lots of writers there. I'm going to contact some writers in this genre or near the genre, and I'm just going to have them read it and, pay them to read it and give comments. And, one of the first things that happened, and you'll probably laugh, is, I would meet with them and then I would just hand them over the whole book. And they'd be like, you wrote a whole book? I'm like, well, yeah, how would you know the story if I didn't write the whole book? They're like, that's usually not how things are done. And I laugh now when I think about that because every step of the way it's been like that. Okay. This is a book that should not be published. This should be to most people's, what they told me. This is a book that, people won't, when I would talk to agents, they would say, opera singer spy in the Cold War. Not gonna buy it. So it was kind of deflating because I was going to conferences and pitching and stuff, and I was getting that. And then at the same time, I was taking classes by then on how to craft a book and from a very good institution. And I even had one professor ask if he could co-author it with me. Now that tells me the story's good. Okay. And so sometimes, well, just like when I was getting started with opera, sometimes you got to believe in yourself. And with writers, you have to believe in your story. And I knew it wasn't crafted perfectly yet, but I knew I could get there, and I knew it would be a good story. And being an actress all my life, I kept writing it as I've seen it as a movie. Okay. And I wrote the whole thing like that. And I think that's one reason it just moves so fast, and keeps you on the edge of your seat. But I was told, oh no, you can't learn to screenwrite. You can't go straight to that. You have to write a book and then you present it, which on Thursday I have a conference to learn how to do that. Because this has been my goal all along, is to either make it a movie or like a Netflix series. I think it'd be perfect. And I've had my dream cast in my head for years. And so you know, I had to believe in this book when I had no encouragement, from the industry very much. And so I just published it on my own with a hybrid publisher. And now I have some lovely publicists. And guess what? People like the book a whole lot. And that's both editorial reviewers and reader reviewers. And yeah, it's hitting a spark. And I think one of the reasons is the very reason they said it would not work is that, opera singing by. I took a master class with James Patterson, and you get assigned TAs, in there that work for him. And that TA, after he coined it, said, I love it. Finally, I found someone that just, said he loved it. And he said, make sure you coin this phrase, opera singing warrior,
Yeah.
And so at some point, when she learns a lot, Clive Matthews, the MI6 guy, goes, my little opera singing warrior, because she just kicks it a lot of the time. And so that was really great that a friend of mine actually bought that master class for me. And that was sort of a turning point to me because I think I was on my third draft by then. And I was like, is this ever going to happen? And yeah, he was real encouraging. And so at the very end, I had a friend that came back to the area that I've been friends with for 20 years. He's a playwright, and he edited my last draft before I handed it in. And boy, that really helped because he even made it go faster. I mean, he just, he took the fluff away. Let's put it that way. And it was action oriented. And so, I think I understand how to do that now because when he reads my drafts from the second book, he's like, oh, this is going to go a lot faster this time. You got it. So it's been quite a journey. But no, if someone had told me 15 years ago you would publish a novel, about, this this subject or any subject, I would have went, no, I don't think so,
That's an amazing journey. It sounds similar to mine. I had an experience with anorexia as a young adult. And then when I had little kids, I was staying home with them. And then in the evenings, I started writing. I just started, and like much like you did, like it was a movie in my head, and I started writing it down and I fictionalized it. I did a first person account, fictionalized account of my
Uh-huh.
experience. But yeah, it sounds, and then I decided to take classes and find an editor and all of those
Yeah.
things. So yeah.
You did have about the same journey I did,
Right. Kudos,
you
yeah,
know.
kudos on your experience and following through and making it sing. So and making it sing. You like that? A little pun there.
He
Yeah,
can do
it
that.
sounds
Yeah.
we do puns in my family, so sorry.
Oh, I love puns. I love jokes. Um, my first podcast was just a while back, I haven't been doing this very long at all. And I still don't know all the jargon, so I'm going to try to learn that now because I've been caught up in that a couple times. And so this fella says, right before, we start recording, he says, all right, we'll start with your elevator pitch. I'm sure you know what that is. I did not. All right. And so I've only pitched for like live conferences where you get at least, 5, 10 minutes. And so I thought, well, it shouldn't be that long. So I had something prepared. So I just went with it. And then the whole thing went and it went pretty well. He kept trying to get me to say I was Kaitlyn Stewart, and I wouldn't do that. And then, he kept saying, well, what about the people who are turned off by opera? How are you going to attract those people? And I'm like, sir, this book is not about opera. It's a spy thriller. But so anyway, we got through it. It's been my least favorite. I don't care to say it. It was. And then once we're off, he says, well, that was the longest elevator ride I ever had. And I was like, okay, could you tell me exactly what an elevator pitch is? And he's like, well, you're in an elevator with an agent and you have just the time that you get off to, pitch your book. I'm like, as if that would happen. I mean, although I did pitch to one person in Minneapolis on an escalator
Oh, there
because
you go. That's very close.
I had an appointment with her, but then her flight was whacked out and she had to get to Denver, the same place you are. And so she said, well, if you can just go with me. So I grabbed one of her bags, and the hotel had this long escalator. And then I went out the front with her, and she couldn't get a cab. Well, this opera singer could get a cab because I have a loud voice. So I got her a cab, put her in, and went, okay, thanks. But I guess that's as quick but that still wasn't as short as what he was speaking of.
Right.
And so I told him, well, didn't you know we were in the Burj Khalifa in Dubai? That's a long elevator. He should never try to wisecrack an opera singer because we have comebacks. So anyway, it's been an experience, but I'm learning, and I feel blessed, with the reception I've gotten about the book, because you can imagine I don't consider myself a writer.
Well, you are, and you are an author as well. So,
But so to hear people in the know, or even just lovely readers say the things they're saying, I'm almost flabbergasted, but very pleased. Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
I don't usually read thrillers or spy novels, but I am moved to pick up your book, so I will do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And like I say, it does get graphic in a few places, but it's very short. And if you don't like it, just skip over that. I'm not trying to send that, I just want people to know the gravity of these men and what they would do.
Well, tell everyone where we can find you and your book.
Well, I have a website, kaysparlingbooks.com. There's a lot of material on there, more every day. And then Also, I'm on all the social medias. So, being so old, I'm not going to know anything about that. So one of my graduate students has taken over that for me. And thank goodness. So she's my assistant now. And she takes care of putting everything on everything, so you name it. Let's see if I can remember all of them. Well, there's Facebook, of course, and then there's X, and then there's Instagram and Blue Sky and LinkedIn. I'm not going to remember them all.
No, that's okay.
But anyway, they're on the website and where you can go. And also, I have a very special thing because I wanted, the whole movie thing. So this man, who's a friend of mine, actually composed a theme song for Mission THAW in case it becomes a movie, and also theme music. Like James Bond has his, and of course Mission Impossible. Boom, 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 boom. So he on my website, you can hear on the front page, you can hear the little theme music, and then when you go to author, there's an illustration, kind of a comic of Kaitlyn and one of her wisecrack quotes, and then right underneath that is a song, and one of my students sang the song. So very cool. So we do have a YouTube channel that has that on it, and then just recently one of the magazines I did an article with wanted me to do one of those 5 things videos, so I actually just got that up on it yesterday. So yeah, YouTube definitely has something a little special on there that I don't think all authors have.
Oh yeah, no, that sounds like really fun. Yeah, to have like a theme for your book. So
yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
A cut above, we will say.
Just a little different, just in case.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing, Kay. Thank you again so much for being here, and we will look forward to having you back when you release Impromptu.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and you have an enjoyable summer.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.